In this presentation, we will consider payroll options with regards to our accounting. Let's zoom into it with Xero. Here we are in our Get Great Guitars dashboard. We're not going to be considering the payroll options. Let's first take a look at our balance sheet like we typically do. Let's go to the accounting drop down and go down to our balance sheet. So we'll be opening up the balance sheet as that opens, or when it opens. We're going to be right clicking on that tab up top, and we'll duplicate that tab up top. Here's what we have so far for our balance sheet. I'm going to hold down control and scroll back up to that 125. That's where I like to be, the 125. Now, I just want to touch on, the payroll information because that's going to be part of the setup process, and we just want to get an idea of the payroll process. So note, if you're dealing with payroll and you had beginning balances, for example, here's our beginning balances from the prior system, you may have some balance sheet accounts related to it, which might be like payroll liability type of accounts on the balance sheet that you have to put into the system. So a couple things, just note that if you're dealing with payroll, you want to hopefully do the transaction to any new payroll system you might be doing in the beginning of the year, if at all possible, because it's a lot easier than having to deal with a change from one system to another, even if it's a quarter end. And if you can't do it at the beginning of the year, then do it at the end of the quarter, if at all possible. And if you can't do that, just really try to do that, But you'd like to do it at the beginning of the year because the payroll will typically be yearly no matter what, and you're going to have to consolidate the whole year's worth of data, and it's a lot easier to do that if you have all the data in payroll in one payroll system as opposed to two systems you're going to have to kind of piece together at the end of the year. So you might have to deal with payroll in terms of the liability that you'd have to put in the books. We're not going to have the liability here that we're going to put into the books. But just realize that when you set up payroll, you got a couple different options. We touched on them earlier. Just want to touch on them here as we go through the setup process. And one might be that you do the payroll basically from a third party. So first of all, you may not have payroll. If you don't have payroll, then that's good. You might need payroll in the future, but you're good to go without it. If you do have payroll, even if it's a small amount of payroll, you typically need some type of help. So you want some kind of software usually to help you out. If not, payroll professionals to help you out with that. Payroll is often, combined in some way, shape, or form with the human resources kind of things as well. So you might want to consider those two in conjunction with each other. So you can run payroll through, in essence, Xero, but it's basically an add-on type of feature to do that. It is a separate company to do that. So to look into that option, select the drop down up top, and you can go down to the payroll, and it's payroll powered by Gusto. So that's going to be the major thing that they recommend, the payroll powered by Gusto here. And then you can go use Gusto for all payroll, get your first 2 months for free, and so on and so forth. So that's the one option you can think about. You also probably want to talk about payroll. I recommend talking about payroll with basically a third party like a CPA firm and just pay them to give you advice. That's what I would do with the payroll, because that way you're going to get advice that's not biased. If you're trying to see if they want to do the payroll, then obviously they're going to be biased about whether or not they want to do the payroll because they want to pick up the work. If you pay someone just to give you advice about payroll, that's probably a good way to go. So if you talk to a third-party payroll advisor and then they give you your options, then consider talking possibly to Xero or looking more into Xero and their Gusto payroll options. Just about any software you use, payroll is usually going to be some kind of add-on feature because it does add a whole lot of different things into it in terms of integrating, making the quarterly statements, the yearly statements, and then just processing the payroll for each time period. So just realize that, if you use like an Intuit or QuickBooks, QuickBooks provides it. It's done by Intuit or that company, but it's still an add-on. So it's still an added feature that you're going to have to pay more for. So it's a similar process there. The other question is, do you want the payroll in your books? Do you need all the detail within the payroll in Xero, or do you just want the financial data basically in Xero, and maybe you can have the other information that's going to be processed in some other system, such as a payroll professional? So maybe you're saying, hey, I don't need all the payroll checks and detail for the payroll in my system. I just need the overarching financials to be correct. Maybe I can have Xero, or maybe I can have someone third party like a Paychex or an ADP tracking all that detailed information, providing the employees with all that information, the pay stub information, the year-to-date withholdings, and all that kind of stuff. For that kind of thing, you might consider the two big ones there are typically ADP, which might be a full-service outside party payroll, or a Paychex. Now, again, if you're thinking about these third-party people, you probably want to get advice from like an independent person, like a CPA, about these options first, and then go talk to them, because obviously if you're going to talk to ADP or Paychex, they're going to be biased towards their service. But you might be able to consider going to these institutions, possibly for a third-party payroll, and then just enter the balance into your books somehow. You can also be considering the apps involved, in terms of, you might be able to integrate through applications the ADP or Paychex into the system, so you can ask them about that. How easy is it to integrate the third party into the system? So those are just a few things to consider in the payroll. We won't be working or setting up payroll in the practice problem, because we want to keep it with the free service for payroll, but we will be thinking about payroll as if it was done by a third-party payroll professional, and just adding the journal entries into the system so you can see what payroll might look like in that format. And then later on, if we want to test it out, we might test out the payroll with Gusto at some point, and do a section on that, or a whole course with payroll.